I haven't experienced anything in my lifetime like that.
Yeah.
And it seems like a really big deal for me, but I don't really. I think it's because I live now and I'm seeing this all unfold. But I'm sure this probably isn't the first big democracy movement that's ever happened in history.
No,
but it's definitely gotten a lot bigger because of social media and the weird situation.
The whole world is involved now.
Yeah, the whole world.
Yeah, good points. Do you know much about that? I'm curious.
Well, the only thing I was thinking is it got kind of controversial with the pro-democracy movement because some of the NBA players, you kind of followed what they did with this.
No, I didn't.
If I'm understanding this right, I don't want to say too much because I could be wrong, but there's a strong linkage, and this might not even be the same thing, but I think there's a pro-democracy movement going on there, and it's tied to China, right? Because they want democracy. And some of the NBA players have big, massive contracts. They're making money because the NBA audience in China is huge. And so like LeBron James and some of the NBA players came out kind of not pro-democracy in Hong Kong because they were actually, they are making a lot of money from China. And so their pushback was like, seriously? You guys aren't going to promote democracy? You're going to promote big money over here? Because usually, like LeBron, he's kind of usually more left and more like into the social issues, more in a democratic mode. But here, he's caught a little bit of flack over that. Did you know that?
No, there was a similar issue though with Blizzard Entertainment. So they do Overwatch, Hearthstone, and big games,
the big video games,
And they had two, I don't know what their exact names. I'll just call them like host announcers and whatnot. And they were talking to a winner of a StarCraft tournament, and the winner put on his tear gas mask because he was out in Hong Kong, and talking about the revolution and pro-democracy movements. And Blizzard's response was they fired the two guys who let that happen, and then the guys like $25,000 winnings they completely withdrawed and gave him a 6-month ban from all tournaments.
Wow.
And the internet was very, very upset about this whole situation.
Yeah.
And so all over the forums and on Reddit, they were blowing up about how this problem happened and how they were kind of silencing that. And they responded with a okay answer in a way. They were talking more like, at Blizzard Entertainment, quite a majority of us do believe in what they do, but they don't want their platform to be a sort of like political stage where you can announce all your views.
Yeah.
So they withdrew some of the punishments they did.
Right.
So the guy didn't get 6 months, he got like only 2 months, right? So he only just missed one tournament after that. And then he got his winnings given back to him and all that. But they were very unhappy about the whole situation. And that was like one of the few times that I see like a major company like that, especially internationally, where they're shaken by like one movement and one action so strongly that they have to change everything and kind of how they do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So our channel is called Worldviews In Conflict, and it just brings different worldviews into certain subjects, whatever subject. Like literally, we talk
Where's your buddy?
about anything, and so that's really fascinating to me. Just like, I guess what would you say is like your position in terms of just understanding the whole situation? Do you take a personal side, or
I think that Hong Kong should get what the protesters want. I forget their exact. They have like a list of commands that they want. But I definitely do believe that they should have their they should have democracy in Hong Kong. And I looked at the history part side of this, and it's been an issue for a while to where after British occupation left, they China said they owned it, but the people in Hong Kong said like we're not not with you in any which way. So they gave them like, okay, here's a 50-year notice of how long until they have, and then that 50 years hit in the 80s, and then it got extended again down the line. But it's like this, it's a problem that's being, a stone being kicked down the road, not having to deal with it, and it's in a long-term view, it's kind of frustrating how they're not gonna deal with this in any way.
Can I ask, since you're pro-democracy, do you have thoughts on China is is Marxist, socialist? Do you feel do you have strong feelings about Marxism, socialism, whether it's right or wrong? And and then they'll have movements towards democracy, which you're supporting. Do you feel any thoughts on socialism, communism, or is that a topic you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with it. It's kind of like the different forms of government and how a country rules or governs itself. There's no right way to govern. As many people have said, men aren't angels. So
that's interesting.
We can't. There's not one right government, and if you were to change all the countries in the world to like a democracy, right, it would shake the world, because in some places a democracy just wouldn't work sometimes. Right. But in America, democracy is what we live by. Right, it works for us, at least to this degree.
Sure,
but
there's issues, obviously.
Right, but in China, I'm not saying China should be democracy and all that. But the way Hong Kong is that it's been like that for so long, right? And their rights, and it's made them Hong Kong almost its own country in a way. That having to have China come in and be like, this is what you are now, and doing, because China is a very extreme sided country, and Hong Kong is not. They're kind of polar opposites in this whole issue.
Sure.
And having a country can have their ways if it works for them. No matter, even if it is kind of sad in a way, right?
Sure.
If the way I see it is that if the people are living that way and it's doing well, then it probably shouldn't change. Like North Korea, I don't think North Korea should rerun the way it currently is. I think it's terrible in every which way. But
we shouldn't go in and change them.
Well, we
call them out.
We should kinda. At one point there should be some interference, but we shouldn't make them. This is your form of government now. It should be like a more push back towards it's like a circle and there's all different sides.
What do you feel if there was like in Iran, there's a huge push by the people to go towards democracy, and then they're controlled by an iron-fisted government, and then the issue is would you be in favor of us supporting a revolution in a place like Iran to overthrow that complete autocratic situation that they have over there? Would that be a place that you would be in favor of maybe trying to have a revolution, and we would support it?
If the people believe that there should be a change to the power that they're in, right, it comes to a decision of how much support do they need. If the citizens of Iran needed a complete overhaul of the government, but they did not have the means or the ways to do that, right? I believe going in and being able to help change that is completely justified.
Okay.
Right? As long as as long as we're not putting our government needs, in danger or anything, we should try to help and extend our resources out to people in need of aid.
Okay.
And if Iran wanted to flop their government and switch it on its head, right, then we should help them. But if it's kind of like they want change, but there's not too much of a movement, or it's like this half of the country really wants change, this other half kind of doesn't, we shouldn't probably get into that, because that's not majority pop. And when I mean majority, I don't mean like 50%. I mean like, you know, maybe even 70, 80%, you know.
The situation in Iran, and I won't talk too much more, but the situation in Iran a few years ago, the vast majority of the Iranian people wanted their government overthrown, and they wanted America to support them in that movement, and we didn't. And then most of the revolutionaries were killed. A lot of them were killed and the movement was shut down. And we didn't support them. Would that be something you feel like in a situation, and I know you probably don't know all the details, but you would support trying to get behind the people if it was a mass movement and they were being controlled by really evil dictatorship type situation?
Well, the way, because I have to look at it at like a big picture.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not just the movement of doing that. It'd also be like, you know, do we want this kind of person, you know, overlooking Iran? Because what if it just doesn't stop with Iran? It spreads north, south, wherever it goes.
Yeah.
And it's a, I think it would, especially in Iran's sake, because I believe they have like resources that, you know, Americans love. Out in Iran, they would definitely, we should go out there and be behind that movement to continue to support it.
Yeah.
And especially if it works out in the end. But what we definitely shouldn't do though is like a support where there's no ends to it. Right. You know, we don't want to be stuck in there like,
Sure. Yeah, forever.
that would be bad.
Sure.
But we should at least push and support and give them enough resources to do what they need, but not an overabundance to, you know, where it can like hurt our country, you know, to help support another.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. That is like really in depth. I'm amazed about this conversation right now. This is already way good. We love giving people a voice on this channel, and that's primarily why we're here. We used to do a lot of street interviews about a variety of different subjects, and so anyway, kind of like just moving along because I know you want your coffee, and it's like don't want to be here forever, but on this channel we're talking worldview, and you know what a worldview is?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's basically just how we interpret the world, our lens in which we see everything, right? So it's kind of like our foundation. So you said something kind of interesting. I'd love to get your foundation, your justification, because we were talking about how you're justified to do these kind of things in the government movements, when it's allowed, how government should even be. It sounded like you had implied like a standard of like, you know, moral movements with the majority. We can't really say right from wrong in terms of what a government should look like. As long as the majority is pushing for it, that's what we should support. So I'm curious, is that just kind of like founded in your belief system? Is that kind of founded in just your personal preference? Or is it something outside of yourself? Maybe in like you know, I'm a Christian, for example. Like I would say, I find my moral justification in the Bible and God's word and who He says He is and how He set up government, right? And I'd be like, well, look at this, but what was your like meaningful foundation, just to get your world?
The meaningful foundation that I have is a bit reliant in like, you know, kind of my experiences in life.
Sure.
But also a little bit of like a historical looking view, like thinking of 20, 40 years down the line, or like looking at our past, because I'm a firm believer in that history can repeat itself. You know, if we do the same thing will happen. So I kind of use a mix of those, and then I also use, I'm part of an organization called DeMolay. DeMolay.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have a set of standards and high morals that we hold ourselves to. So love of parents, respect of one's religion, not defaming anyone's character for.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. So yeah.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. But I have a strong set in that, and it's more of like a group of ideas and people that try to keep themselves to a standard moral, and when in that standard moral, we have a set of beliefs in how we do things.
Sure. Yeah.
And I guess like my views and kind of rely in all three of those. So my personal experiences, the historical things that have happened, and my experiences within DeMolay, and within those three, like a triangle, I make a judgment in the middle of what I see a situation as, right? And sometimes I'll take something else. Like if I see, a lot of people in my friend group or a lot of people at my school talking about some experience they're having, I might be influenced by that just because, wow, there's a lot of people on this, and I don't want to be like, if it's something that really conflicts with my ideas, I won't hop on that. But if it's something that's like sort of aligns, but I want to look into it more, I might start hopping on the train.
Okay, I hear that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an open mindset with some strict guidelines or borders set up by DeMolay. Is that how you say it?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, and so it's really fascinating. Now I'm more curious about that than anything else because I'm just not familiar with it. But anyway, that resonated with me as a Christian. I would say like are you familiar with like the 10 Commandments?
Yes.
Yeah, so like honor your father and mother is in that, and then like even Jesus, he said like love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and all of the law, like God's perfect law, is summed up in those two. Love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God. And so that's really interesting to me because I see a really close parallel, right? And I would say my justification is in that God spoke in history and actually lines out like, if there's like a moral law or something we hold that's good in history, then there has to be a lawgiver. And I would say, well, that's something that has to transcend just my personal preference or experience. And so I'm curious, in DeMolay, do you guys appeal to a higher authority than just your experiences?
The way DeMolay works is that it's an international organization. So we try to be really broad. So the only requirements that you have to be is you have to be between 12 and 20.
Okay.
You have to be a boy. It's a males only group because there's 2 other female groups.
Oh, interesting.
And then you have to believe in a higher being than yourself, and it's left purposely broad for that. So, it's whatever religious creed you believe in and, whatever line of faith that you believe that you go down. So if you're, I don't know too many other. Christianity is a really easy example, right?
Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah, pretty common. There's a greater being than yourself, right, in the world, and there's a lot of people in our organization that are Christian, but there's people like out in Paraguay, or actually that's not a great example. Brazil. Brazil. There's a lot of people that go down a different line of faith. I forget. It's a weirder faith, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar.
Yeah, it's left broad like that, and we hold the way that we use, especially God within our organization is it's more like a, help us to be good sons, loyal comrades, junior citizens of our nation.
Yeah.
And it's more like a help us out, help us to become better people, and help us to guide to become who we are, right? But it's not like a pushing factor like, we're loyal onto death for God or something like that.
Interesting. Okay. So you yourself, you're not a Christian though?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. No. Okay. I was curious now. I was like, so in terms of like just meaningful justifications for why we believe what we believe, and I would say that everything you just said was incredibly meaningful for me because I believe that God's spoken in history in His special revelation called the Bible, right? And that I'm not sure how familiar you are with Christianity, but
I'm familiar in a sense.
Sure.
I mean, my friend over there is Christian. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in order to give you my worldview, and hence the name Worldviews in Conflict, to give my worldview, I'll just basically sum it up in like God has spoken in history in terms of who are we and who is He. Basically meaning like God has revealed Himself, and that He's like the ultimate good, right? Good with a capital G, and He determines what is good or what would be government, family, who you are, moral compass, whatsoever, and He's the moral law giver. And like I brought up the 10 Commandments, which is like don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, all the rest, right? And So, in terms of Christianity, just so you make sure you have a clear understanding of it, and from where I would be coming from, in terms of even approaching these conversations, is that I need a meaningful justification for why I believe outside of myself, so I can say, well, this government's really corrupt and it's hurting people, it's causing suffering, because it ultimately is not adhering to what God says is good. And I would ask, whether it be an individual or, as a moral movement, that it be founded on morals that are based in who God is, because it's His character, right? And so I would say I'm not a moral person individually, because as the Bible says, I'm not sure how familiar you are again with this, but like, we're all sinners. We have fallen short. We're not perfect people. We've lied, stolen, all the rest. Like Jesus said, if you look at a woman and lust for her, you commit adultery in your heart. I don't know if you've done that, but I would say as a male, I have. so that I would be, if God is good and He must punish evil, that's just a necessary requirement of goodness, that you punish what's wrong. You don't let it just go and turn a blind eye to it. And that basically, if He's good, I'm unjust in His moral standard. And this is where it got me. It's like, how can I be saved? And I'm sure you've heard of Jesus, but He lived like as a Christian, I would say He lived the perfect life I couldn't, died the death I deserved, risen on the third day, defeating death, and it's kind of God's stamp of approval on His life. And that if I turn away from my sins and trust in Him, His goodness is actually given to me, and I hide in His goodness, right? In His righteousness and not my own. And God gives me a new heart with new desires and an affection actually for Him. And as you probably are familiar with Christianity, you would say that eternal life is a free gift. Nothing you earn by being a good person, because we're ultimately not good people, but it's a free gift. And the call to everyone is to turn from what you know is wrong and trust in the Savior. And so for my moral justification for anything is that God has spoken in history, so I know things for certain. I'm not sure if you believe in absolute truth, but as a Christian, I would appeal to an authority and allow God to have the freedom to actually reveal Himself, right? Because I think what you were touching on was something that we're not exclusive. Where in Christianity, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's ridiculously exclusive. When he's claiming to be the embodiment of truth. And anyway, I was curious just to know, maybe another part of your perspective, how familiar are you with that, what I just said there?
How familiar?
Yeah.
Kind of. I'm not Christian, but I've definitely attended Christian-related events, and I've attended church with my buddy,
sure. Yeah.
right? And I've gotten bored and gone on Wikipedia and looked up ideals of different religions, and especially definitely Christianity.
Okay.
But I'm definitely familiar with kind of what you said and kind of where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say it's from my worldview, and again, push back on this if you'd like, and I would say that it's the only meaningful worldview. It's that actually makes sense of the reality we find ourselves in terms of everything else. Yes, appeals to truth, but there's Christianity. I mean, since you're not in another religion, I'm not having a conversation with a Muslim right now, or with a Mormon, or Jehovah's Witness, or anything of the sort. So I'm just talking to you right now. Christianity gives me a meaningful justification for even what you said earlier, in terms of historicity. How can we trust history? Where is it going? How do we know good from evil? So when a person comes up to you and says, I want to punch your neighbor in the face, I can be like, that's wrong, and it's not just that I think so. Right? And so I was just curious, how do you judge a moral movement?
I believe the movement is moral in a sense. If it's it's kind of annoying.
No, sorry, that was a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I going back, if it's the mass of the people, right, believe it's for moral causes, right, then it's moral for the large mass of people. If 6 point, actually we'll go even bigger. Like there's 7.2 billion people in the world. Let's say 7.19 billion people in the world, like all universally agreed that a cheeseburger was the best food and it should be in the highest power seat of government ever. And it's a bit of a funny term because I can't think of anything.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, right. But while that group of people may not agree, it's like a mass to just like majority of people believe this, and if the morals kind of lie up with the mass of people, and there's no like, we're only doing this because we don't like you because of your race, sex, gender, any of that.
I would say that's a very biblical standard, but
yeah, but it's a kind of lost the train of thought. It's more of like, sum it up really. It's the mass. If the mass of the people agree that something is moral and something is right, then in a way it kind of is moral, because the whole idea of human mindset and what is good is a generalization that it's all accepted, like punching people in the face. Now I don't immediately go to, Bible said that it is wrong to commit something like that. I go to my neighbor says it's wrong, the other neighbor that's not getting punched says it's wrong. A lot of people say it's wrong. So it probably isn't a great idea, right? And with that, it's not excluding like individuality too much, because you can still have your own idea. Like if I really hated the neighbor, right, and I was like, he deserves to be punched in the face, right, but everyone else says no, but I felt really strongly about that, I can have that personal view, right, but it doesn't justify with me doing that, right? It's the idea of justification versus preference in kind of a weird way. So like I prefer to punch the person, right? But is it justified by the mass of the people? Probably not.
Yeah, and I would just point to, and I'll give you a meaningful justification. I want to get your response real quick. I would say that's you care about those things, not because the moral majority. I hope that if everyone voted to punch your neighbor in the face is okay, you would be the person to be like, nah, I'm not going to do that, right? I would hope so.
Right.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning personal preference, you were mentioning the moral majority as kind of determining factors in your worldview for moral movements. And I mean, you have to press the issue, right? Like if everyone voted, yes, it's okay to harm your neighbor, then is it okay? And ultimately, and so I would always say no, because God spoke in history, and I think you do know that because you're expressing your moral image, a moral character, because you're made in the image of God, and I think that separates us from the animals, right? Like we have a conscience, like we have this crazy thing called guilt, and this weird thing that we care about, which is justice, which makes no sense in the animal kingdom. And like we don't see like animals setting up court systems to judge and imprison and punish evil and any moral outgoer. And so I would just always point to God's authority, even if a corrupt civilization such as like Nazi Germany said this is morally okay to kill the Jews, and then the majority says yep, I'd be like no. So what do you think about that in terms of like, if in this hypothetical, if everyone said harm your neighbor, how would you object to that?
I'd look at my moral compass, because then my moral compass and my triangle of beliefs would be like no. And if it's and it's for something polar opposite like that, I would definitely lean towards my preference and all that. But it's kind of like a
But if someone disagreed with you wouldn't have anything to say why they're wrong.
No, I wouldn't be like, you are completely wrong, right?
For like hitting your neighbor.
For hitting your neighbor, and here's why. Because at that, I'm kind of like arguing for something that isn't, and the neighboring thing is kind of a weird one to do, because it's all generally agrees like, we shouldn't hit our neighbors. So me justifying doing that is kind of a weird way to say it. But if it was like,
I'm just giving like a hypothetical of like if the law was to, hey, harm your neighbor,
right.
What I mean?
But if it was like the opposite way, like I thought I should harm my neighbor, right, and then the person said it otherwise, right, I can't argue why they're wrong, right?
Yeah.
They're completely justified. But the way my polar opposite now.
Yeah.
The moral compass says that I should punch my neighbor for whatever they did, right? It's I lean towards my moral compass. Will I always act on that? Who knows, right? It's situational. But would I believe or kind of align with something like that? Probably.
Okay. And yeah, that's really interesting. And I would apart from God, I would say, I do believe you would be taking issue with that, because I think you do bear the image of God. You have value, worth, dignity, all the rest, not arbitrarily because I think so, but because you're actually made with value, worth, and dignity outside of yourself. And it's kind of like the same way as if, like, I'm not sure if you take more of an atheistic approach, but in the same way I would say to my atheist friends, like, ultimately, if we are just stardust, ultimately, in the very end of time, right? If we just came from stardust, then what is the moral implication of stardust bumping into stardust? Well, nothing. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if I punch or harm or murder. And that's what I don't believe you are. So I don't believe you're just stardust. I don't believe your ancestors were fish. I do believe that there is something in us, like you're saying, a conscience that it irks at you. And that I would say there's a meaningful justification for those things, because the biblical God is true, right? And so that would be my perspective. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely.
Man, I love your perspective. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for
and then did you have any closing things?
No, I think you guys really did an awesome job. If you'd like, we give these, and I think it's really interesting perspective. See what you think. And here's where you'll be. You can find us on Worldviews in Conflict. Luke does all the editing, and we are way behind.
We're a little behind right now. Editing's tough.
So it'll be a while, but you will find yourself on there. And we usually cut the interview, but we'll definitely give you a voice. You'll see if we have a 40-minute interview, it'll be cut down.